So please join me to welcome our panelists and also our moderator to the stage. So over to you, Kun Sawan.
Hello, hello. Good afternoon, Bangkok. So good to see you in person. Greetings from Bangkok to all my audience live. Virtual hello to all my Zoom panel members. Sawadee krap to my panel members in person. Today's session is around ETFs. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll be looking at why ETFs are relevant in our portfolios. What are the pros and cons in investing in ETFs? We will look at the global trends. We'll look at the macro picture. We will see why they're relevant in ASEAN and Thailand. It is the blue-eyed child in the Western market. It is the leaner, meaner, light sibling of the mutual funds in the Western world, but it seems like a neglected child in ASEAN and Thailand. Let's address it. We'll give food for thought for the full ecosystem. We've got the wholesale market, we've got the exchange, and we've got the distribution channels here. We will give them something to speak about. It'll be a very open and candid conversation. I encourage the audience to ask their questions. When I look at investment veterans, Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, and Cathie Wood, they've allocated their investment strategies, or they've bespoke their investment strategies around ETFs. They've adopted it. Hedge funds are using this on a daily basis to hedge themselves. They get instant risk exposure. Let's find out what we're doing wrong or what we shouldn't be doing. My name is Sarvan Kapoor. I'm your moderator. I want to welcome my panel members. I would like to start with Dr. Rinjai, if you can please give an introduction.
Hi, everyone hear me? I'm Rinjai, work with the Stock Exchange of Thailand, also responsible for product development and also marketing.
Great.
Actually, I'm ex-May banker as well.
Welcome. Great. Lucette, over to you. We were sitting in a different order.
London.
You are in London. Hello.
Hello, hello to Bangkok, and a warm welcome to everyone on the conference. I'm Lucette Ivano. I'm Global Head of Systematic Fixed Income at Fidelity and pioneering ETF for Fidelity worldwide.
Great, thank you. Christian, over to you. A brief introduction, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Christian Obrist. I've been working at BlackRock for almost 10 years, and I'm running the distribution for iShares ETFs in Asia. I'm based in Singapore, but I'm actually visiting Hong Kong. So I did a week of quarantine, and I'm visiting the team up here, and it's a pleasure to be speaking to you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Clarence.
Hi, I'm Clarence from BNY Mellon Investment Management, based in Singapore. Yeah, so in my role, basically, I'm the head of client solutions for APAC ex-Japan, so responsible for building up the firm outsourced CIO office in the APAC region. So my previous background is I have been in the ETF industry for more than 20 years. So having run index research, ETF portfolio manager for both equity and fixed income for more than a decade, and as well as basically taking on the role of head of ETFs for two issuers in Hong Kong, running distribution, product, and investment team previously. Yep, happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Clarence. Dr. Pankon, may I ask you to provide an intro, please?
Hi, Sawadee krap. First of all, thank you, Maybank Securities Thailand, for having me as one of the panelists. My name is Panukorn. Currently, I'm the Vice President at Bangkok Bank. My job is to manage Bangkok Bank's on-balance sheet portfolio. We are currently investing across several asset classes, public equities, private equities, hedge funds, and also we investing in ETF as well.
Great, good to know.
Thank you.
Kun Pot, over to you, sir.
Hi, my name is Pot. I'm the CEO of One Asset Management Thailand. I've been in sort of international banking, having done global markets and investment banking for the past 20 years, having worked in Thailand and Singapore. I've been at One Asset Management for 6 years, basically doing all sorts of investment products, including ETFs, which I will discuss about today.
Wow, we have an exciting panel. We have the full ecosystem. So the first topic I wanted to kind of cover or begin with was global trends within the ETF market. What we're seeing the Western world do right. The innovation and the evolution of ETFs from the early 90s, from fixed income to high yield to corporate cash to ESG related funds, and now digital assets. More importantly, ESG related ETFs that have come into the market over the last 5 years. And my favorite, bespoke and personalized ETFs to my horoscopes and zodiac signs. So are they pull, are they push? We'll discuss that. When I look at the global ETF market currently, it stands at, I think, $9 trillion. And over the next 5 years, it's going to double. Lucette, I would encourage you to provide your own insights onto the global ETF trends and what Fidelity is seeing.
Fidelity is traditionally a platform where we manufacture a lot of publicly listed vehicles, but ETF was never part of the remit. We have been late entering this kind of market and obviously offering more ESG-driven, more climate-aligned product. We've done it primarily because many of our clients were very frustrated about the time to enter the traditional mutual fund, and also the cost of transaction, how it was passed to people entering traditional mutual fund and how it was socialized rather than allocated to the investor which are coming in or out of the fund. And it's been extremely successful. Obviously, we are still new player in the market, but I think over the next 5 years, we will probably double the number of ETF that we have listed currently. Most of our ETF or active ETF, not tracker, not getting any of the indices, and they're giving access to very different side of the market compared to our traditional active CCAV and ICAV product. So quite a complementary offering for our client. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Christian, Clarence, over to you. I want to kind of isolate this question for ASEAN. We have 680 million people in ASEAN. It's a $3 trillion economy. ETFs are relevant for sure, but what can ASEAN do as a region to learn from the global trends? Christian, may I rely on your input first, and then we'll head over to Clarence.
Yeah, sure. I can start. I think obviously if you look at the global picture, and we've seen the ETF industry go from strength to strength, and while it's not early in the game anymore, the upside is still enormous, because if you look at ETF penetration into overall asset classes, the equity, and particularly in fixed income, the runway for growth is enormous. And I think when we look at the client types, there's probably no longer any type of client that isn't investor into ETFs. That doesn't mean everyone is investing, but from a client type, whether it's retail, private banks, asset managers, even sovereign wealth funds, we really see all types investing. And I think when it comes to ASEAN, it is clear that some of the access, right, the method of accessing, either global exposure or products that are listed outside of the local markets, that really is important when it comes to the local investors being able to access that capital. And so I think we've seen in a lot of markets, including Thailand, more investment into ETFs, still channeled mainly through the local asset managers. We overall see the rise of the retail investor, which some providers cater to, others it's not a core market. So for BlackRock, we are an institutional business, so we don't run a B2C business model. But I think it also, the other thing that's still a little bit of a hurdle in the system is the way the remuneration system that we still have with retrocessions. And that means that a lot of distributors, intermediaries in the ecosystem are not necessarily focusing on using ETFs as a building block. So I think as an ecosystem, there's still a long way to go. And, you know, sometimes that just takes time. There's obviously a lot of stakeholders in the ecosystem, but what we are seeing is that even in markets where you have potentially intermediaries that are not naturally biased to use ETFs, the end client demand is actually sort of pushing upwards and demanding solutions. And of course, the retail investor themselves, in some markets, not all, has the ability to access ETFs. But I'll pause there.
Great, thank you. That's actually great insight. Clarence, just building on what Christian said, what is BNY seeing in ASEAN, in Thailand?
Yeah, sure. I think generally, if you look across Asia, or in particular Southeast Asia, there are I would say sufficient users of ETFs. The difference being that a lot of all these users in the ETF, they don't invest in the ETFs in their own regions. So if you look at, say, the large sovereign fund funds, the pension funds, the endowments, some of the asset managers, when they buy into ETFs, they either buy into the US range or they buy into the UCITS range, which is and not in their own region. I think there's many reasons for it. I guess part of it is familiarity, part of it is legacy reasons, part of those could be the need for a larger size, liquidity, and so forth. But I think so. I think in general, there are users, there are institutional users of ETFs in the market. But we have yet to see a lot of those buying into their own local markets. I think the other reason is also the exposures that are available in the local markets may not be sufficient.
Okay, that's great. Absolutely agree, actually. Kunpo, Dr. Panukorn, and Dr. Rinjai, just building on from what Lisette, Christian, and Clarence said, where is the disconnect in Thailand? Why is the domestic ETF market not right at the minute? It's the unloved child, essentially. Dr. Rinjai, may I have your input, please?
I guess, like, how should I put it? Like, the ETF in Thailand, basically, I think there are a lot of things that we have been done, you know, maybe add on that. But I think for the product to take off, it should have the sort of a conducive ecosystem to begin with. When I say ecosystem, I mean the regulation that, you know, supportive for an ETF to have like a variety of product in terms of underlying, like equity, bond, and others kind of a commodity. Also, like a varieties of ETF, like active, passive, inward leverage ETF. So basically, all the institutional investor or retail investor can use whatever is sort of conducive for the situation. That I think that is one thing. Like having said that, I think as a regulator, they have to balance between like being easy and like in terms of protective for the investor as well. Then I would say that regulation is one issue that we have to look at it. And the second, I think, is like a number of participants is who actually committed to the market is not much. What I mean is in terms of participants, I mean market makers, like we have to admit that basically mutual fund, basically they sells on selling agent and people buy and sells every day at the end of the day at the net asset value. But the value of the ETF basically on the liquidity, one part on the liquidity on the main board. And also for institution, the main board might not be enough. That liquidity happen to be provided market maker of the exchange or like aggregation, redemption, something like that. So I think in Thailand, we sort of need to have more in terms of market maker in order to provide that liquidity as well, which we don't have much at present. which is like, I think is a particular issue for a small emerging market. But if you look at like developed market, they won't have this issue, okay? The third one is, I guess, on the issue of interest and commitment to develop the ETF, of course, with the support of the exchange and other regulator, I think there are only limited number of people, of asset managers who want to develop that with the exchange. One is the one, One Asset Management is the one that have been working with the exchange for a long time. He can share that because there are a lot of sort of in terms of operation issue and also in terms of sort of a substitute product like mutual fund, which basically regulatory requirement like disclosure and also investment and requirement in terms of like something like a INAV, something like that. They don't need to do it. So basically, they can sort of launch that kind of product very quick and more commercial. I guess like that is the basic fundamental that we have the issue with ETF. But having said that, I think this past year we have sort of looked into this issue and try to fix this one by one. With I think I'll share that later.
Mhm. Thank you, Dr. Rinjai. Dr. Panakorn, we've heard from Dr. Rinjai, we've heard from our virtual panel. There is a place for ETFs in the domestic market. What are your thoughts? What are you seeing on the local level? What's the consensus?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say that, as an institutional investor, I think ETFs has a lot of benefits, right? So I think a lot of people in this room study, finance and can remember about, portfolio theory, right? If you look at the portfolio theory, I think the theory say that, average investor, whether institutional investor or retail investor, should hold some combination of, risk-free asset and a well-diversified risky assets, right? So that's, why, ETF is so popular, because with one trade, right? If you invest into ETF, you got the instant diversification. And everybody who's in the finance investment world knows that diversification is one of the most important tenets in principal investment, right? So basically, as an institutional investor, I like the products. But to answer your questions about the local ETF, I would say that if you look at the developed market, like in the US or in Europe or elsewhere in developed countries, investors have a lot of choices when it comes to ETFs, right? You got a lot of, many products in terms of the asset classes. You have equity ETF, you have fixed income ETF, and you mentioned right now we also have some sort of digital asset ETF as well. So investors basically have a lot of options. But in Thailand, I think Dr. Rinjai probably know most about this, but I think local ETF, we have probably maybe like about 12 ETFs. And in terms of the market cap of those 12 ETFs combined, it's less than 600 million US. And if you look at the volume traded average per month, it's still very thin. So that's quite difficult for institutional investor, for example, like Bangkok Bank. If we would like to invest in ETF products, we would like to get the instant beta exposure into the market. But we have a large investment budget to deploy. But if you look at the products, small AUM and liquidity is not that liquid. So it makes it quite difficult to invest domestically. That's why I think I quite agree with Clarence that he mentioned that most of the institutional investor, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, looking to invest outside of ASEAN because there are so many more varieties of the ETFs products and with better liquidity.
Fair point. Khun Pert, you and I have spoken multiple times on this topic. Liquidity is a concern, I get that. But if there is outflow into ETFs, into international, there must be some learning curves we can do as an ecosystem to to encourage the adoption of local listed ETFs, right? I appreciate we have 12, but those 12 are very equity centric. So as a retail investor, I'm always in my head, I'll be, why can I not just go trade equity straight on single names? So what can we do as, you know, as an ecosystem, as a AMC in Thailand?
Out of the 12 ETFs, there are 5 equity ETFs. 3 are sector ETFs, but they are also equities, like there are 2 energy and 1 banking. 2 are foreign ETFs, which currently the exchange is trying to promote. One is China, and one is called U Hero, which is like a gaming ETF. And one is a fixed income, and the other one is gold, which is commodity. And you're right, Doctor is right that there's not enough depth, there's not enough volume. ETF typically has diversification like stocks, but the great thing about ETFs is it has liquidity providers, and it's real time, right? So anyone who trades, and it's low fee, right? So anyone who trades should ideally want to do ETFs. We'll come to education later, why people should buy ETFs of set 50 or set 100 rather than buying a single stock. But apart from education, Dr. Rinjai is correct in saying there is an ecosystem, but it isn't a perfect ecosystem. And interestingly, listening to you talking about from an institutional investor's perspective, not only there is not enough volume or choices, the pricing is still not consistent enough. We find that, you know, we have the largest institutional investors in Thailand, such as Social Security Office, Government Pension Fund, Government Savings Bank, all these institutional investors who always want to seek for low-fee products, right? They don't need active fund management because they're already active investors themselves. So they want to have something low-fee and efficient. But when you find that there isn't an efficient enough mark-to-market mechanism whereby the pricing of the end of day and the INAV don't perfectly match, there is still some flaw in the system. So not only we're not talking about the ecosystem, we're talking about the pricing itself. Now we've been set we've been trying to engage more market makers, MMs and PDs, right? And you know, we have a few. I mean, some of our funds like TDEX, which is the largest equity ETF in Thailand, we have about 4 MMs now and about 2 PDs. We tried to get JP Morgan to come in. They happily came in, and then there's some FX issues because they need to trade from London as well. So both FX issue and time zone difference. And again, back to the size. It doesn't make them money, right? Because the size is only just above $100 million, right? I think ours is probably the biggest if we don't count the fixed income. So for institutional investors, they need some kind of confidence that they can readily mark to market and also have something that they are assured of that if they want to sell, they can sell the whole lot in one. Okay, so that's back to liquidity issue. I know, you know, people in Thailand have done researches on active and passive markets, and they've been saying active markets in Thailand charge more expensively. We should go back and trade on passive funds. They're probably right. If you count over 10 years, probably right? But I'm just saying that people in Thailand, I mean, private banks, we're not talking about institutions, we're talking about high net worth individuals who are served by private banks or private wealth departments. They tend to be sales biased. They tend to be KPI based. So when they have the KPI to produce money, and ETFs charge like 30 basis points, no front end fees, right? That's another problem. We have 2 sets of players who are very big in Thailand. One of them cannot find efficiency or depth or volume. One need fees in order to pass the KPIs. That is a problem in Thailand right now. Because normally, when I sell mutual funds, I rely not only on institutional investors, but high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth people. They don't buy into this because there's no fees. So we go back to education. How do we educate so that people overlook the fee component? We'll come to that later.
Yes, thank you. That's actually a very good point. So on the first topic, just to conclude, I think it's fair to say ETFs are relevant in any investment strategy, be it retail, be it institutional. We can get instant diversification, we can get instant exposure, and it's relevant for all generations, right? That leads us nicely to our next topic of discussion on the ecosystem. So when I look at the new generation, when I look at the institutional investor base, and even the mature generation or the pension holders, that active-passive debate is always there. There is a misconception that if it's traded on an exchange, I have to be active, but ETFs can be a passive tool as well. So the question goes twofold, actually. We heard from Christian, Clarence, and Lucette on how the D2C or direct-to-consumer channels have worked really well in the US. I think if you look at the US market, 50% of trading volume in AUM is driven by retail, but the ecosystem has done something correct. That's regulated distribution channels, incentives for the private banks, etc. So Lucette and Christian, actually, there's that direct-to-consumer debate happening across the globe on investment products and everything related to investments. Lucette, what has Fidelity done so well to get that direct-to-consumer model right from the get-go?
I think obviously the number of active participants and distributors is key, and that's something that Fidelity has built and distributed for a number of years. So the network is working, and the creation of client interaction mixed with distribution platform and obviously the whole distribution platform is particularly powerful. But I also think that being innovative, creating products which are more transparent, creating products which are in demand and not just fashionable, and creating the same building block which we have need for internally in our multi-asset platform is something that is tested and well trialed at Fidelity. We know what is needed. We know from the feedback of our own customers what the market is doing and where potentially the new products should be placed. And I think this experience is quite unique to Fidelity. Obviously, we have been focusing primarily at our franchise on pension plan and multi-asset allocation for pension plan, but that has given us obviously quite a lot of knowledge on what is needed. We have also obviously a big franchise in Sharehold, which is distributing a lot of tracker, and that's been successful. The growth has been exponential in recent years, but until recently we had nothing in fixed income, and that's where we have built an offering which is much more active rather than pure tracker. I think also one of the purity of the offering is definitely being that a client with on a regular basis and are quite attractive. We have a number of traditional active strategies and easily jump from one asset class to maybe trading in duration in currency as we speak today. And the client is not always quite aware of the purity of the product. In the ETF world, we tend to have very defined and targeted product, which will primarily deliver performance through one big stream of positioning, and that's been extremely well received.
So that
Thank you.
basically, yeah, no, thank you for that, Lisette. That basically validates the point. It's critical mass that dominates. That's the key ingredient for the success, right? Fidelity. That's actually good. Christian and Clarence, from ASEAN and Southeast Asia and Thailand, in other sectors or industry verticals, we've seen that direct-to-consumer model work. What's stopping ETFs or investment-related products to go into that direct-to-consumer model? Has it been even tested?
Well,
Christian, yes, please.
yeah, yeah, you make a good point, right? Has it even been tested? I think, with ETFs, you really have to look at each market and understand the history, the evolution. And of course, the US, which is the biggest market, ETFs have been around for over 30 years. So it has taken a long time to get where we are today. And of course, the market continues growing very quickly. So, that's number one. But the second thing is really around regulation. And if you look at where ETFs have really accelerated, regulation has been a huge part of that. So you've had regulation in Europe, in the United States, and then particularly in Asia Pacific, it's been in Australia, where you've had retrocessions being outright banned and forcing a complete change of the business model of distributors. So that's one of the huge reasons. The other part is the ecosystem does have to be developed enough. And prior to coming back to the region here, I was working in Australia for the last couple of years. And Australia went through a similar trajectory where it took a long time for ETFs to take off. But as soon as the regulation changed and these trailer fees or retrocessions, however you want to call it, were banned, it completely changed the way the model works. And the other point which has been raised in here is, of course, that ecosystem. You need enough product. You need enough product choice. You need liquidity to be working. You need enough market makers to be in the system. And, over the past few years, we always struggled with that in Australia as well. So it just takes time for investors to feel comfortable. And obviously, the more investors you have, optically, that liquidity looks better. But each product set will have a challenge. And I think, in Asia in general, we have, especially in markets like Singapore and Hong Kong, to a degree in Taiwan, the uptake of the UCITS product domicile is enormous. And a lot of that is tax related because of the withholding tax exemptions and double tax treaties that exist in some countries but not in others. So yeah, it just takes time and you need everything to fit. And I think regulation and then, of course, that ecosystem is key. And then the other point is, and even in markets like Hong Kong or Singapore, the growth of the locally domiciled ETF markets, they haven't really grown yet either, because a lot of investors just go to the US, right? When you look at an ETF in the US, bigger is better, more liquidity, tighter trading spreads. UCITS, not as much, but similar, right? They have a lot of products. They're quite large, although liquidity is optically misunderstood because of optical fragmentation. So it just takes time, but there have to be structural incentives as well to build a local listed ecosystem. It has to make sense also economically, I think.
Thank you, Christian. Apologies to those that couldn't hear me earlier. Just building on from what you just said, Christian, there is, in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong ETF Connect is a great framework developed by the regulator to kind of address some of the issues you just highlighted. Clarence, I think you're the closest person to this ETF Connect in Hong Kong. Would you like to give us a few insights, how it's working? Is it still in infancy, or can ASEAN actually adopt that framework to fast-track the adoption?
Sure. I guess the ETF Connect. So there's different pieces around for the Hong Kong piece. So so the more recent one, I guess, with most ETF issuers in Hong Kong, they're really looking forward to it. Is the one that is connecting to China. So the ETF Connect. So basically, for ETF issuers in particular, it is a very attractive proposition. So in the sense that you are able to tap a different set of distribution. So which is why I think generally the industry is all looking forward to it. From an ASEAN perspective, I guess the only reason why you want to do an ETF Connect is largely if the ability to tap into a different set of distribution, right? So from that standpoint, if there is the opportunity to do that, and then it is worth it. But the flip side being as well that you have to have sufficient products. So there's no point doing a connect whereby you do not have enough products to distribute to the other markets and vice versa. So I just want to go back to earlier when Christian was talking about the market. I guess in Asia in particular, right, there is indeed the need for a structural change or at least a catalyst for the ETF market to really boom. Right? So I think retrocessions in the case of Australia, Japan, you have the government sovereign wealth fund buying into ETFs to basically spur the interest. In Taiwan, you have regulators, you have regulations that basically have certain benefits for ETF issuers to launch products and basically allow individuals to trade in, or at least insurance and institutions to trade onshore. So there are different pieces of regulations or structural changes in the market that basically spur the development of the ETF market in general. Going back to say Hong Kong, for example, right? So you have the whole change around the MPF regulations, which is basically for MPF, which is the Mandatory Provident Fund, for MPF providers to buy Hong Kong domestic products, right? So then there is benefits from the standpoint that you don't have to do certain currency hedging for international exposures. So to a certain extent, those measures or changes basically bring about changes or interest in the markets. So which allows issuers to try and launch more products. I guess from an issuer standpoint, there's probably going to be the interest or at least the willingness to launch more products, knowing that some of them may work, some of them do not. Right. At the end of the day, ETFs are to be sold. You can't just launch an ETF and list on the exchange and expect that clients, investors will come and buy. At the end of the day, they have to be sold, whether it's through institutions, it's through a broker agent, or direct to consumers.
That's actually leads on to my next question for Dr. Panukorn and Kun Po. We spoke about distribution channels, the brokers, the agents, the intermediaries. But they've been successful in marketing mutual funds. That's been their bread and butter for the last 20, 30 odd years. And the adoption from the retail perspective and institute perspective has been good. What's holding them back in ETFs? I think two parts to this question. Is it the education or the lack of knowledge on ETFs, or is the lack of incentive? Your thoughts, Dr. Panukorn first, please.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think partly is because of the education. I used to conduct the academic research, looking at the level of financial literacy of the Thai people. And it's quite disappointing that, on average, the financial literacy of Thai people, even, some of them, working in a financial institution, still the results came out quite poor. So that's the first thing that I like to mention. And I think another thing, I like to address one of the point that you raised earlier about, active and passive, if I allow to address that as well.
Sure.
I think a lot of people on these panels kind of agree that, ETFs are useful products. But just want to share my view that ETF is not for everyone. I mean, it backs to, investment basic, right? You have to do the investment policy statement of your own, whether you're a retail investor, you ultra high net worth, you high net worth, or you institutional investor. You need to come up with the return objectives, risk objectives, investment horizon, and investment constraint, and so forth. And because if you look at the investment objectives, sometimes you have a return target that you need to achieve, right? And you need to understand that investing in ETF, you get only beta exposure. Okay, maybe right now I think there's a new product, like an actively managed ETF. Let's pause that for a moment. But look at the traditional ETF. It's a passive product. It's similar to index passive funds, right? When you invest in ETF, you get the beta exposure. You get the beta, the market performance. You don't get the alpha, right? But some investor, I think if they can achieve a little bit more in terms of investment performance, and if it's a long-term investment, it makes a lot of difference. I remember I have read the case about one of the most successful pension endowment fund in the U.S., Yale Endowment. They are, in terms of the investment philosophy, they kind of believe in active management, and investment result. In the past 30 years, it's about they deliver about 13.6%, and the way they manage their portfolios, they try to pick and choose managers. They primarily investing in active mutual funds. But as I just mentioned, it's not for everyone. For big institutional investors, they have resources to do so, right? Because, for example, if average investor would like to choose mutual funds, and you have to conduct the due diligence on managers, right? It's quite difficult. Remember 4 Ps, right? You need to, when you do due diligence on fund manager, you need to look at people, you need to look at philosophy, you need to look at process and performance and so forth. Not everyone has a capability to do that. So sometimes if investor have a higher return objective, maybe they have to invest into active product as well. Or if they have a resource, or they have an investment professional team to do the manager selection, maybe it's okay too to invest in actively managed products.
Thank you. Kunpo, I know you're itching to go, so please.
Well, to add to your question on education and incentive, I would add a third leg being rules and regulation. We've been fortunate enough as a company to have embraced anything the SET and the SEC have thrown to the table. We were the first to launch property funds in Thailand. We were probably the first to do the equity ETFs. And when there was a regulation on ASEAN passports, launching funds in Singapore or Malaysia, we were the first, and I think still the only one, to have launched a smart beta stocks ASEAN ETF. The reason why I'm talking about the ETF that we launched in Singapore is just to show you that when there's a passport, there isn't a walkway. So basically, the rule says you're allowed to go there, but you have to actually, there's this tall grass, 1 kilometer. You have to walk and find your own ways, right? So even in Singapore, we weren't allowed to solicit sales. This I'm covering ASEAN as well, right? Not just Thailand. you can't solicit sales. There's no tax incentives. There are a lot of obstacles. We had to pay 10 million baht to get a lawyer to list the ETF on the stock exchange. Whereas in Thailand, when we will launch a mutual fund, we pay 100,000 baht, right? So around what, 3,000 US, right? But we had to pay 30,000 US just to get it listed. And it had to be through a lawyer or some legal firm. But the biggest problem was not being able to solicit sales, meaning we cannot talk about the fees, we cannot talk about incentives, we cannot have incentives, we can't talk about returns. What we can do is educate people, go through intermediaries like Philip Securities, whoever, and ask them to sell for us. So it's very, very, very costly and very time consuming. It took us 1.5 years to launch that. And it didn't become successful. So the cross-bordering of ETF is also an obstacle. So I think if we need a concerted effort in launching ETF in ASEAN, we need a more, ASEAN is a great bloc, right? 600 million people, young population, blah, blah, blah. We need to have a more concerted effort in doing like single filing, one language, same fees, and you're able to sell across the board and apply to the same tax reason. So regulation is very important. Number 2, education. I'm not sure how many of you realize that there are only around 1.5 million to 3 million people having an onshore mutual fund account in Thailand out of the 70 million population. Obviously, that's less than 5%. I think if you look at the overall investment picture, less than 5% invest in Thailand. Less than 1% have more than 50,000 baht in their deposit accounts, right? Just re-highlighting the gap between the rich and the poor in Thailand. So, people who don't have money will not invest. And they don't invest because they have no education, financial literacy. So it really, it's a big ask for not the SET alone, but SEC, the Ministry of Finance, everyone to get everyone educated. Maybe it's time people don't invest in single stocks. Maybe they start with an ETF of SET 50, right? You buy 50 most liquid, biggest market cap stocks in Thailand to have a ready-made asset allocation, diversification, rather than buying a PTT or a bank stock, which doesn't really perform, right? Or hasn't really performed in the past few years. So the education into doing that, I was lucky enough to be a judge at the Stock Exchange of Thailand on how to get 10 million people to open stock accounts. And there were 20 teams, I think, competing in that competition. And 2 very important, very interesting themes was like lottery. A lot of people in Thailand buy lottery, right? However much money or not much money they have, they buy lotteries every 15 days. You've got to make the winnings. They've got to have the winnings incentivized into buying stocks or buying money market funds or something like that. Play with the mass. Play with the demographics, right, in order to encourage people, or at least get them to be aware that we exist. And another thing is, given now there's, we're all Gen X baby boomers, some Gen Y in this room, right? We need to have our products being adopted on the digital asset space in order to garner the interest of the younger generations. I know there are issues with digital assets at the moment that the rules don't allow us to invest in cryptos and everything, but they allow us to invest in investment tokens and utility tokens. That's a good starting point. We can actually have ETF listed as a token. Trade on Thailand Digital Exchange, TDX. That's an exchange which has been approved and signed by the Ministry of Finance. That's a starting point. Have ETF trade as a mutual fund. So we actually create more marketplaces for people of different gens, different type of investors, retail, high net worth, institution, to invest. And the third part is incentives. Why am I so passionate talking about this?
No, I'm really keen to hear.
Third part is incentive. The easiest incentive is tax, right? You know, there was an introduction of RMF, right? Retirement Mutual Fund, 20 years ago. And then there was another one called Long-Term Retirement Fund, LTF, Long-Term Fund, which gave you tax benefits. And that's what got a lot of people to turn their heads into mutual funds. We should do the same thing on ETFs. Once we educate people to invest in ETFs, we give them tax incentives. I know I'm looking at Dr. Rinjai, she's looking at me. I'm not from Revenue Department, don't look at me like that, right? But seriously, you either give investors some incentives or you give securities companies incentives to do market-making business, right? Right now, the people who are MMs for my funds, for my ETFs are KGI Securities, Asia Plus, JP Morgan, Maybank if you want, right? So you got to create a space for these firms to want to do the business. And then, if the wealth, you know, I was talking to the CEO of Maybank, right, in the toilet. There should have been lots more interesting topics to talk about, but I asked him, would your private wealth invest in ETFs in Thailand? No, they invest in ETFs abroad as part of their asset allocation spectrum, right? And rightly so. How do we get them to do it, right?
So let's change that topic on the dinner table tonight. I think Kunarapat will be very keen to give his thoughts on that.
Oh, I don't want to talk about this at the dinner table. No, but generally, so we just give incentives to people to do market-making business or PD business, investors to have some incentives. It doesn't have to be tax. It could be something else. Create more market spaces, like on the digital exchange, have ETFs trade like a mutual fund or something, and have regulations that allow easier access or something which moves them from buying single stock as their first piece of investment in their life to ETF.
Yes, please, Dr. Vinjay, you are next. I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm scared now.
But I know Kunpo was itching to ask that question directly to you. So please, where can we actually draw inspiration for what just Kunpo said? Because it's given you the local consensus, essentially.
Let me share what we have done. Actually, Kunpot would knows all that I have to say. I agree, with Christian, and that he said there would be like in terms of regulation that we have to have a flexibility in terms of regulation enough for like the product to work, and also it's like some incentive which Kunpot already said that he's not Minister of Finance, but he would like to see some incentive in terms of taxes, something like that to spur the investment. But I think like as an exchange, we always like work in short term and long term. Long term, we'll say that kind of incentive, but in short term, we will do whatever we could control. So basically, if you look at what we have done in terms of incentive, we give incentive to issuers. So basically, we give them seed money. We give them like I think we waive listing fee, annual fee, waive whatever it is, that would be the cost them. So basically, we do whatever we can do to support them. We revise the in terms of operation, in terms of creation, redemption, make everything to be like electronic. So, all the process could be done very easy. In terms of market maker, we have the incentive program for market maker. They have the hedging problem. We ask Bank of Thailand to allow them especially to trade in USD futures, which non-resident are not allowed. But if they perform as a market maker in listed ETF, we allow. Yeah, those sort of thing that we're trying to sort of give the incentive to them. And also the last one. The last one. I think I agree with Kunpot in terms of education as well. We actually, since the COVID-19, I think everything now has been turned to online education. So basically, we have sort of survey investors in terms of online to see like what kind of their perception toward ETF in order to design what kind of education that they need. And I believe that in order to attract new investors, which I think right now the lifestyle of investor, basically they are more computer literate. So everything is mostly will be online. We also have like investor education program for all ETF. I think we just launched it, and also then have the influencer to talk about the ETF, educate them softly, like all the 12 ETF that we have, what kind of strategies that you can use in each ETF for, for each station. So basically, we done all the ETF. Also, in terms of distribution, we also asked the SEC that would it be considered to add distribution for ETF to basically selling through selling agent. That would be like a more channel for distributed ETF. Also, as the exchange, we have like try to expand investors because every now and then, everyone sort of have kind of some loyalty point, right? So we partnership with like credit card to turn the point to credit card, from credit card to mutual fund. Right now, we are looking at if you could basically start as an investment for, from turning point credit card or loyalty card to ETF. Yeah. It's sort of a build awareness of ETF into everyone's lifestyle. Yeah. I think that's what we have been doing in this year. Yeah. But in long term, I accept that there will be some kind of adjustment in order to make the ecosystem better.
That's great. Thank you. Clarence, Christian, you've been awfully quiet. You've heard from Thailand or the local people on the ground. How can the regulator, how can the ecosystem, the local people on the ground actually take inspiration for what MAS has done, what Hong Kong Connect? Can we replicate those models instantly because they've done the groundwork, essentially, right? The exchanges in Hong Kong, the exchange in Singapore, and even the regulators. So in essence, they've made our life easier in the domestic market. What do you think? Is that possible? Do we start lobbying? Clarence, go ahead.
Happy to go first here. I think, look, a lot of what's been discussed is exactly right. And you can look at the markets abroad and take the best practices, whether it is a tax break, whether it is regulation around the cost of market making. I think that's a big one. All of these things, they need to work out. And then, the problem is at the moment, it's a chicken and egg situation where it takes a lot of investment from the participants in the ecosystem. And so there need to be a few breaks. And again, going back to the example I made with that regulation abroad, that has been just a huge accelerant. And I think you've got a big market in Thailand, there's a lot of people. Obviously, the way wealth is distributed, that's a different topic of discussion. But there is capital around. I think people are looking for solutions. So it's about bringing that demand closer to the product. At the moment, that broader product set is missing. But, I think what the local participants are doing, the ones at least who are bringing product to the market first, it's brave, but this is what it needs. And I think, if the regulators are serious about it, we see the dividends that ETFs give to the investment community, right? It is very clear, it's transparent, it's low cost, it's diversified. I think everyone can agree on that, and there's no debate around that, but it is around conflicting biases and just interests. And I think, again, the government or the regulator does want to make a change. They probably can. I'm no expert on the Thailand specifics, but we see it in most markets where you do have that change come from the top, so to speak. It makes a huge difference, and then suddenly allows a local product provider or the market makers to get more involved, and that just accelerates the whole ecosystem.
Okay, I think I agree with Christian as well. I think yes, it is a start that you can look at what the other jurisdiction, what the other markets are doing. But a lot of it will also depends on the underlying market within Thailand, for example, right? So what are your market structure? What can be done? What can be not? I think from my experience as previously as ETF issuers, and I share a lot of Kun Pot comments and sentiment with regards to dealing with market makers and so forth. But in general, yes, as much as we can look at the other markets or what they are doing, but a lot of it will also depends on the various stakeholders within the market. So I guess in the case of Thailand, the exchange, the issuers, the various market makers that participates in the market. And we used to have that in Hong Kong, that basically all the various participants comes in on a regular basis. We discuss, we trash issues, and then try to have new initiatives or whatever developments that can change. So, but I think the short answer is yes. You can look at other markets, but you will largely have to look back into what your existing market structure is, what can be implemented, and what works and what may not.
Okay, that concludes our current topic of discussion. So it's fair to say that Thailand and ASEAN do not essentially need product innovation when it comes to ETFs. It needs marketing innovation. Would you agree as a panel?
Yes.
I see a yes from Lucette.
Yes, yes, yes.
Christian, Clarence, your view on that? Dr. Unjay? I know you've been promoting a fair bit over the last 3-4 years.
I think we need, if you say product innovation, like a new product for Thailand is a product innovation, but it probably the product that has been in the other market. But we need new product, new kind of ETF product in Thailand.
I think marketing innovation is, I wouldn't entirely agree, because if you say marketing innovation, we're talking about infrastructure, which is going online, as you were saying, online. I would say a lot of firms tend to want to go online because there's less cost for the company, right? Clients come and trade online, there's no need for marketing to spend time with them. But at the same time, marketing don't get the commissions.
So I'm gonna dissect that.
So marketing innovation doesn't necessarily always help.
Yeah.
And it's the same as, when, I don't want to use the word churning, but when marketing when they trade single stocks, the lead time is quicker. Mm-hmm. You trade ETF, takes longer time to trade, so they make less commission. Again, it's the same as I've spoken before. Mm-hmm. So marketing innovation in the sense of getting everything online or creating a new way of innovating where they buy might not necessarily be the answer to all.
My point was on education, Kunpot. How do we do marketing innovation to reach the masses? How do we make sure that my average investor or saver understands that the low entry point on the increment versus mutual funds?
From a PR point of view, yes,
yeah.
Definitely agree.
Thank you. Our final topic, and I'm really keen to answer some of the questions from the audience as well. So I'm going to quickly try and address this. ESG for ETFs. That's a very, very, spoken about topic in the West. It's spoken about in Australia. But I want to again answer or address this topic for the audience in two parts. One is for my average investor, the daily savers, the mature generation, the new generation that want exposure on ethical and sustainable investments. I know the Australian market has reacted very well by providing some of the ESG frameworks for ETFs. But there's a way of utilizing that intellectual capital on the ethical funds, on the fair ETFs, and passporting it across to the local domestic market in Thailand and even ASEAN. Christian, I know BlackRock has done a lot of work on ESG ETFs. Is it too early in ASEAN for those to be deployed, products to be deployed, sorry?
I might have to actually take a pause here because, again, I've just returned to the region. I think, look, we're still early in the evolution of ESG products and ESG ETFs. There has been a lot of product proliferation. Of course, recent geopolitical events have dented performance for a lot of these outstanding ESG sustainable products. So it has given rise to some of the naysayers to say, well, I told you so, this doesn't work. But I think, you have to take a long-term view here. Again, the products haven't been around long, particularly in ETF format. And I think you do need to realize that each part of the world is still a little bit different, right? But overall, right, a lot of the conversation at the moment is driven around climate. That's where we see a lot of interest. But again, it depends in which country you are. If you are in Australia, for example, there's also a lot of focus on controversy, which is also then embedded into certain products. So it can be very wide. Others can focus more around topics like tobacco or weapons, etc. But I think overall what we're seeing is that for us at least right now, there is a big focus on the E at the moment. But again, it just depends. So I know I'm not answering the question with regards to the local aspect, but broadly, globally, it's gaining a lot of steam. I think the products that are coming out are a similar pricing point. So there's no real excuse to say, well, it's a lot more expensive. The products are now priced at the same level. But it is early, but the interest is enormous. I think most investors don't fully understand what they want. And it can also be driven sometimes by just maybe the board of a company saying this is what we'd like to do, but we still see some hesitance. So it's early days, but at a global level, there's massive movement and interest and a recognition about the long-term consequences.
Thank you, Christian. Lucette, I know ESG is very close to your heart, and you've done a lot of work on ESG. But if I interlink it to ETFs, from a retail perspective, are you seeing demand in the US? Are you seeing demand in Europe from the retail market on ESG-related ETFs? Lucette, you're on mute. Apologies, we cannot hear you.
Sorry. I think the trend is starting now, obviously mostly led by regulatory framework, which are encouraging most allocators to think more about eco-friendly social aspect and other endangered climatic conditions on our planet. But I definitely think also that the new retail population throughout the world wants better cause for their investment. And I definitely think that in recent months, having worked with a number of retail providers, the trend is starting also through Asia. Obviously, the lack of local taxonomy, the lack of local validation, and perhaps data point number of market will mean that it's not going to spread as quickly as we had anticipated, and potentially some of the more macroeconomic and global tension that we've seen in recent months will further delay the question. I mean, I've seen all kind of articles regarding electric vehicle and so on in recent months, which are putting a real dent in confidence of decarbonization and potentially shaking up consumer for our ESG ETF. But the demand is there, and I think we're not going to reverse. So I've got high confidence that it will also spread through Asia.
Great, thank you. Clarence, BNY Mellon, is it seeing adoption and demand on the ESG-related ETFs?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I guess, yeah. And we actually launched a range of sustainability products in the US recently as well. So I think, but coming back over to Asia, so I think we have definitely seen progress in Asia as well. If you were to say a year or two ago, I think people were curious about ESG, were asking about ESG. There was not so much conversation, or there was a lot of conversations, but a lot of it is just basically out of curiosity. A lot of it is basically trying to understand what ESG means. But I guess if you fast forward more recently, then you have seen the educational or the knowledge level basically increases. Right? People are now talking more about exclusion-based. They know more about whether it's positive screening, integration, ESG integration, or impact, and what. So the conversations with investors have certainly changed, going from more being curious and to now knowing exactly, or at least more or less, what direction they want to take. But it's still very in early days. I guess most investors are still in the transition phase, whether it's understanding or basically literally moving to ESG investment in the whole process of making sustainability integral in the portfolio construction or risk management process. But I will probably say that but relative to Europe or to US, we are probably still in the infant stages.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good to know. Kunpo, Dr. Panakorn, Dr. Rinjai, on ESG ETFs relevant for retail market in Thailand, can we actually try and do test and learn strategies to see if there's adoption, or is it just a no-go for the Thailand market? Dr. Rinjai.
For ESG for ETF?
For ETFs.
I'll let them put it this way. In the ESG has been a big thing for Thailand, especially for listed company and also institutional. I think for retail investor, it's just the beginning phase to learn about the ESG investing. Some sophisticated investor might be very interested in, but I think given the current situation, I think it's just the beginning of the stage that for retail investor to learn about sustainable investing. Yeah, I would put that way.
I think what the SET has been trying to promote in the past 5 years has been on the mutual fund side. They've created indices such as TSSI, Sustainability Index. Both the SEC and the SET have been trying to get 22 asset management companies to launch CG funds, but primarily on Thai companies first, right? We were lucky to launch one before that, anti-corruption fund. So basically, we weren't allowed to invest in any companies that the SEC or Anti-Corruption Thailand Association don't allow. Performances haven't been that great, but I am in compliance with SET totally. I'm up for whatever they want us to do. Maybe you need to create an index first. And then we'll comply. No, but seriously, Dr. Rinjai and I have been working very closely for 5 years. There's been a mandate from the president of the SET to make sure that the TDEX ETF goes up to 10 billion baht in size. Right now, it's around 4 billion. So we are going to do everything we can to achieve that and as Christian said, finding that structural incentive for all to create a better ecosystem. But ESG definitely is something we need to do, we need to adopt. But right now, very hard to sell as a concept. Of course, 2030, 2050, 2040, India, Japan, China, they've always come to say they're going to build houses without, emissions and things like that. They're all nice and easy to say, but in order to sell in Thailand, you've got to have the return to show as well, right? What is the difference between investing in Set50 and ESG fund? What is the difference between investing in ESG and CG funds in Thailand? Of course, global ESG will have a bigger market, and I think Dr. Rinjai could probably market to have people wrap some of ESG stuff into ETFs as well in the future. So I'm all for it, yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Panakorn.
In regards to ESG, I think it's quite difficult to speak on behalf of retail investor whether they like the product or not. But at Bangkok Bank, I think we put a lot of emphasis on ESG, and right now I can say that we are trying to incorporate the ESG checklist when it comes to making new investment. So I think probably maybe start off with the institutional investor first, and then maybe later on, I think there will be a demand from retail investor after that.
So that actually leads me to my concluding question on this topic. ASEAN countries and corporates in ASEAN, international and domestic, have all embarked on an ESG charter. We, as Maybank, put sustainability first. I think, I'm thinking out loud here, the pledges on net zero carbon and carbon credits, ETFs have a place for institutional and corporates to really fast track that ESG charter or net zero emissions targets by using ETFs as a proxy. Dr. Rinjai, any thoughts on that for the local Thai market?
Using ETF as a proxy for the success of
Either as an ESG charter mandate or to meet their net zero carbon emissions.
I guess you can, if the ESG ETF would be used, I think it could be proxy as the demand or interest of the investor, that they have been focused on the ESG. I think it would be too quick to draw the conclusion that basically, other than the interest, or the success of this ESG, just bring from the ETF,
Thank you. Christian, Clarence, there's various frameworks that one can follow on getting these ESG ETFs out to the local market. Is there an in-house view from BlackRock or BNY Mellon on the best standardized framework that one can use as an ecosystem?
I guess, you have, I guess the most commonly taught one is the PAB, the CTB, right? So, and you have all the various index providers with their own methodologies on it. I wouldn't say there is one that is more superior than the other. I guess at the end of the day, investors will have to assess for themselves what works and what is their preferred exposure. Yeah.
Okay, Christian?
Yeah, just to add to that, I agree with Clarence. There's no universally adopted system that is the benchmark. And we're still in an early phase, and you've got some index providers out there, some better known than others, but again, not universally adopted. So it's early in the game. I think we'll see a lot of changes. We haven't settled on one system or framework. And again, if you look at, what ESG is and how broad it is, it comes in different shapes and sizes. And, at the end of the day, you do need to, as an investor, you really need to understand how the products work, but also just what's important to you. And it's not that obvious. I think, again, we've heard most of the panelists say that, yes, as a whole, investors are learning and making progress, but we're not there yet. And I think to your first question, is a proxy for on the institutional side, I'm not sure, but I think it's a great way to start getting involved, to start learning, start putting capital at work, and then you go from there.
Thank you. Lucette, I'm fully aware that Fidelity went on their own to get an ESG framework in place. Can that be a learning to the global market, domestic market, or ASEAN? And can the local asset managers utilize the framework that Fidelity's developed so well as a white label solution, as a wrapper, or something along those lines to cater to the corporate and institutional needs, as well as some of the retail demand?
Yeah, I believe in the region, obviously, some countries are more over, and what springs to mind in Taiwan or Singapore, and then to a lesser extent, perhaps Thailand and Hong Kong, or perhaps slightly compared to these leaders. So I'm really hoping that the framework that we have developed can be reused and can be also setting into motion of the country to align more closely. Obviously, earlier on, I alluded to the lack of data history, the lack of long set of available credentials in the region, and that's something that will be built over time. But I definitely think that our framework is here to last. We definitely want to help the region develop, further expand beyond what was the initial just filtering of investment universe into progressing, sovereign, established super agency as well as corporate in the region to push that further. And it's also a huge region in terms of saving, developing pension plan, retirement solution in upcoming years. So we definitively want to encourage all regulators also to think about developing this framework right away, and why not endorsing Fidelity frameworks for what it is.
Thank you. For those that are listening in, we have a sustainability-focused Invest ASEAN program tomorrow. There are two events, 9 a.m. Singapore time, Return on Sustainable Investment and ESG Agenda. So please log in if you want to learn more. I'm just mindful of time. There's one final question before we open to Q&A. ETFs, are they dead or alive in ASEAN and in Thailand? So Dr. Rinjai, would you please start there?
It must be alive, but it must be alive, yeah. In Thailand, it's probably at the beginning of the chapters, that is, we would like to see it's growing, yeah.
Thank you. Lucette, from what you've heard from our panel today, what are your thoughts for ASEAN and Thailand?
I think it's a great opportunity, and I think we need to help Thailand and obviously all the players around develop the correct framework and push the agenda further. I mean, it's a unique product for retail, for a number of citizens who never had access to this side of the market. And I think the way it has picked up in developed markets should be encouraging to develop throughout a market which is more nascent. But I truly believe we all have our part to play. And thank you very much for inviting me and all the panelists, because I think it's so contemporaneous topic, and it's so important as we speak to a whole team together to develop the market.
So alive.
Alive.
Thank you. Clarence, actually, sorry, Christian, you're next. Dead or alive?
Well, I think the word dead shouldn't be used in the same sentence as ETF, right? So very much alive. It's just very early days in Thailand and ASEAN. But there's a reason why global ETFs are almost at 10 trillion. So absolutely alive, and will be much more alive in the future.
Thank you. Clarence?
No, agree. It's definitely very much alive, right? You have seen basically all the various participants, stakeholders in the whole ETF ecosystem, right? Still being very active, still actively trying and looking at different ways to grow. So it is definitely much alive.
Dr. Panakorn?
Alive. I completely agree with Dr. Rinjai. Must be alive, and it's just the beginning stage. If you look at the US, for example, I think everybody knows that ETFs have democratized investing. So ETFs, give retail investor the same access to asset class as institutional investors at the same cost, at the same price. So I think we need to develop the ETF market in Thailand, and I think it will benefit both institutional investors and as well as retail investor in the future.
Thank you. Kunpo?
Yeah, very much alive. Can't say dead. Alive and kicking too, because we need to kick on. I think, if I may, 80% of TDEX fund, which is the largest equity ETF, is invested by institutional investors. So having said earlier about INAV not being efficient, there's no mass market, these players buy it long term. A lot of these are life insurers, government banks, government agencies. So it is very much an alive product needed by local institutional investors. There was a mandate to have institutional investors come in, and we made sure that we have prospectus in English and everything, right? And we put it on the Clearstream platform to actually soft market it. So very much alive, and I agree with Doctor as well that it should start with institutional investors. A lot of institutional investors invest long term, so they don't really mind the inefficiency in mark to market, which is a lot better, by the way, because there are more market makers and PDs around more now. So definitely alive and need to kick on.
Great, thank you. I just want to open the floor to some of the questions that we've had from the audience. So clearly everyone's interested and they're definitely alive, right? ETF is alive because we've got so many questions on the board. Kunpo, Dr. Rinjai, a lot of these questions are directed at you, as you can see. I can go with Kunpo first. Kunpo, there's 3 questions that I can see. One that I really want to kind of answer is regarding One Asset Management launching an ETF with other underlying. Sorry, let me read that again. If One Asset Management has a chance to launch another ETF, what kind of underlying asset in the ETF would be interesting for Thai investors?
Political answer would be ESG. No, I think it has to be on a global scale. Right now, the exchange is trying to promote, wrapping products on a global scale so that it can be easily accessible to local investors. So it definitely needs to be something offshore because there's already enough onshore products. ESG would be a good starting point. Another good starting point to be different is alternative asset. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Like REITs. We have gold, we have oil, we have commodities, but REITs is something very interesting, and I wouldn't say it's an all-weather asset class, but it's a pretty decent asset class and a return smoother in your portfolio. So REIT would be interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. The mechanics behind a REIT fund on an ETF will be quite different, but we can discuss that.
Yeah, REITs and infrastructure, right? So things with higher dividend than you can get from bonds or stocks, and more diversified and backed by governments or really large companies. So that at least on the credit risk, you don't have to worry as much.
Thank you. Dr. Rinjai, there's a question on digital assets and cryptos that's come up about 4 times on the board. I think for Thailand, you're probably best placed to answer that. And you can choose to ignore it if you like. Can One Asset Management or someone like the local AMCs do launch an ETF that's backed by crypto or digital assets as an underlying, and would they get the same treatment as equities, or would you need the underlying regulated?
Let me answer your question by going back to the regulation. At present, what kind of ETF you can launch? Basically, there are regulations specifying what type of underlying asset that that ETF basically based on. So existing regulation doesn't say anything about the crypto. Yeah. So basically, reading from the regulation, I would say that ETF backed by crypto asset is not allowed by regulation. I put it this way.
Okay, so we need to lobby the regulators, if you know.
I don't think, to add to Dr. Rinjai, I don't think we can launch a mutual fund that invests into ETFs with cryptocurrencies as underlying. But we can do investment tokens and utility tokens. So got to give them time. I don't think Dr. Rinjai will be able to answer you what will happen in the future, but from what we allow, it doesn't exist yet. But before I came here, I just had a meeting with the SEC, and I said, digital assets is something we need to embrace rather than reject.
No.
So let's see. I think once the SEC is on board and ready, I'm sure we can probably have it sometime in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you. I know we've gone over time, but I want to kind of just wrap this session up. ETFs are relevant and alive for both ASEAN and in Thailand. We as an ecosystem need to get together, collaborate, have shared learnings from the Western world, look at what frameworks we can deploy, look at any ready-to-deploy solutions in terms of white labeling some of the products that already exist. That might lower the launch fees or marketing fees, essentially. But I encourage more collaboration, and we can discuss this over dinner tonight. Thank you, my virtual panel, for being here. Thank you for providing your insights. It's really great to have you, have your thoughts, and very candid. So thank you again, Lucette. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Clarence, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Have a lovely day.
Thank you. And just finally, thank you for my in-person panel. I know you took your time being here, so thank you for making the effort. Thank you, Dr. Rinjai. Thank you, Dr. Phanukan. Thank you, Dr. Pipo. Great. So that concludes the session.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you all the panelists who are participating. So now we are approaching the last part of today's seminar. May I invite Kun Alapat Sangkarat, CEO of Maybank Security Thailand, on the stage for the closing remark.
สวัสดีครับทุกคนครับ Wow, that was very nice. Again, day one has come to an end. I would say that was mission accomplished. I think we did everything we wanted to. And again, I'd like to thank our panelists and also moderators and all the people actually put this together. I mean, it was a huge effort. And believe it or not, we went through a whole lot of effort figuring out what do we want to talk about? What do our investors and what do our clients want to know about? And at the end of the day, we really picked topics that we thought should be talked about. Not just what people want to hear, but what should we be telling people about? And so ETF is not something you hear a lot in the news. People don't talk a lot about it, but it's actually something very important to the investment community. Because as we heard about it, it is huge globally. It offers us investors so many things. I mean, we heard about that it's a lot lower fees, for instance, so it's good for investors. You can diversify very quickly, so there are a lot of good things. So this long story short is this. I mean, you've already heard a lot about ETFs. And, like I said, I think when we put this whole program together, we just wanted to make sure that we have panelists who are very passionate and really truly believe in what they're talking about. And so you saw from the last group of panelists. I mean, they live and breathe this, and they really truly believe in it. And that's what we really wanted. We really want to get that out. But we also want to have not just a substantive discussion, but we also wanted to make sure that there's a diversity of thought. I mean, if everyone on the panel and all of us are talking about the same language, we agree on everything, then really there's nothing to learn and really nothing to understand about it because it's the same thinking. And I think personally, the last few years especially, you read newspaper, you read blogs, you read everything. It's almost very similar thinking. We all hear about the same thing in the market. Everyone talks about crypto, digital asset. They talk about the economy doing well. There's a lot of tailwind. It's going to be great. And somehow, a lot of that kind of, without any diversity, then it doesn't allow people to think. And then in terms of investment, it doesn't allow us to make an informed decision. So today it was about bringing topics that I think are important for investors, but also bring out different way of thinking to make it more, more productive conversation, I guess. So again, thank you. That was awesome. Great moderators. Savin probably has a career in moderation as well, but stay with Maybank first, so don't go anywhere, okay? The other part, the very first one, thank you, Kunette, for moderating that. I think, you hear a lot about it. I think you read newspaper, you hear the news. Yes, we hear lots of, still some tailwind, things are recovering, lots of headwinds. I mean, at the end of the day, we're in a whirlwind. That's all it is, okay? And so that's normal. And to me, that's sort of, expected. We've been growing globally. We haven't had a big recession since 2008, so it's been 14 years. So at some point, we're going to happen. But recession is inevitable. It's not a bad thing. Yeah, not always. Savin mentioned about tomorrow. This is only day one. There's actually day two tomorrow. And besides the ETF discussion, let me highlight a few more worthwhile topics that we're going to be covering tomorrow online. Okay. One is on return on sustainability index. The other one is actually really interesting, which is connection between DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and financial performance. That's actually really important. The other one is adoption of cryptocurrency from an institutional perspective. So we always talk about cryptocurrency from a retail perspective, but tomorrow will be on institutional as well. So that's actually really interesting. Okay? Since we're over time, let me cut to the chase on my final thought. We talk about a whirlwind right now. I think my final thought's this. There are always opportunities, no matter what the condition of the market is. As long as volatility is not a bad thing, as a lot of you know, especially the day traders, momentum trader, momentum, that's actually a good thing. But I've been in two very big crises, here in Thailand, 97, and 2008 in the U.S., where I used to live. And yeah, it was quite very difficult 2 years. But those 2 years also bring a lot of opportunities. So I know I have a lot of investors, Maybank Securities, clients especially, online right now watching this. And I always say, just because the market's not doing well, doesn't mean we don't have any opportunities. Much like today, as long as we stay interested, stay vigilant in what's going on, and really stay inquisitive, meaning that we always ask, when we see something, we always ask why that's the case. And I think we'll be fine. So that said, why don't I just end it here? And thank you, all of you, for coming. Much appreciated. Thank you so much, audience here, and also audience online. Thank you. Okay, สวัสดีครับ